Some summers leave behind warmth and laughter. Others leave behind quieter things. Impressions that linger like a breath in an empty room. This story belongs to the second kind, the kind that settles in softly and never fully fades. When I was 16, I took a summer job babysitting two young girls while their parents worked during the week. It was a simple arrangement, one that felt safe and familiar from the start. Their house sat in a calm suburban neighborhood, the kind where mornings were slow and quiet, and the air always seemed to hum gently with distant lawnmowers and birdsong. I arrived early each weekday, just before 6 in the morning. Their mother would greet me softly, careful not to wake the girls, then head out the door with a tired smile. The house would settle again once she left, returning to its early morning stillness. The girls usually slept until mid-morning, so I would sit alone downstairs, curled up on the couch, watching television while the sunlight slowly crept across the living room floor. At first, everything felt completely ordinary. Then there were moments, small ones, barely noticeable at first. As I sat watching TV, I would suddenly feel the quiet awareness that someone was standing behind me. Not a sound, not a movement, just that gentle pressure of presence, as if someone had stepped into the room and paused. Each time, I assumed it was one of the girls trying to sneak up on me. Smiling to myself, I would stand up, walk through the kitchen, and quietly climb the stairs, ready to catch them giggling outside their bedroom doors. But every time, the hallway was empty. Their doors were closed. Their rooms were silent. They were still asleep. This happened more than once, maybe twice a week. Always subtle, always easy to dismiss. I told myself it was just my imagination, shaped by the quiet and the early hours. Then one morning, something different happened. I was sitting on the couch, watching television like usual, when the channel changed on its own. At first, I laughed quietly and assumed I had accidentally pressed the remote. I reached down to check the couch cushions, but the remote wasn't there. I glanced up and noticed it resting neatly on the coffee table. Before I could stand, the channel changed again, and then again. Not in order. Not quickly flipping past stations. The numbers jumped around slowly, deliberately. 12, then 34, then back to 3. It felt less like a malfunction and more like someone calmly choosing what to watch. My chest tightened just a little. I stood and walked toward the staircase, expecting laughter or hurried footsteps. There was nothing. The house remained still. Upstairs, the girls slept peacefully, unaware of anything unusual. I returned to the couch, turned the TV off, and sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the faint hum of the house around me. The feeling passed, eventually, like a wave settling back into calm water. The final moment came a few days later. Their mother had asked me to help prepare for one of the girls' birthdays. That morning, she handed me a small hand pump and asked me to start blowing up balloons. I stood in the kitchen, moving slowly, enjoying the simple rhythm of the task. At some point, I felt thirsty and set the pump on the counter beside the refrigerator. I opened the fridge, grabbed a drink, and closed the door. That was when the pump slid off the counter and moved across the kitchen floor, rolling into the living room. I froze. Even then, I tried to stay logical. I told myself the refrigerator door must have shaken the counter just right. I picked the pump up, placed it back where it had been, and closed the fridge again with the same amount of force. Nothing happened. I tried again. Harder. Still nothing. I adjusted the pump's position, tested the door a few more times, changing the angle, the pressure, the placement. The pump didn't move again. Eventually, I stopped trying. The kitchen felt unusually quiet, as if it were waiting. That evening, when the girl's mother returned home, I told her everything. The feelings, the television, the pump. She didn't interrupt. She didn't laugh. She simply grew quiet. Then she asked, almost gently, "It's been happening to you too?" She explained that the television had changed channels on her before, more than once. She told me the girls had mentioned seeing other children playing in the backyard, children who weren't really there. She admitted she hadn't said anything because she didn't want to scare me away. She didn't want to lose another babysitter. We stood there for a moment, the house calm and ordinary around us. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. And yet, the air felt full, peaceful but aware. Nothing harmful ever happened. The summer ended. The job ended. Life moved on. But sometimes, even now, I think about that quiet house in the early morning hours. About how some places seem to hold on to gentle echoes of things unseen, never loud, never threatening, just present. And as this memory settles into the dark, it slowly makes room for the next one. Another soft story, waiting patiently in the quiet, just beyond the sound of falling rain. Some stories don't rush toward you. They wait quietly, gathering shape in the corners of memory. They return only when the night is calm enough to listen. For a long time, I didn't believe my best friend Matt when he spoke about strange things following him through life. When I first met him, he was the kind of kid who seemed to thrive on attention. Loud clothes, louder music, always eager to be noticed. So when he casually mentioned unusual experiences, I brushed them off as exaggerations, stories meant to make him more interesting. Eventually, he stopped sharing them, and I forgot they'd ever been mentioned at all. That changed one quiet weekend, about 5 months ago, when I stayed over at his house for a couple of nights. It was an ordinary teenage visit. Late evenings, snacks pulled from cabinets, too many sugary drinks, and long hours of video games upstairs. The house itself felt normal, comfortable, lived in, softly lit. At one point, Matt mentioned that the ice maker in the refrigerator wasn't working, but there was another one tucked away in the laundry room. I volunteered to grab some ice and wandered downstairs alone. The laundry room was small and bare. Cabinets without clutter. A washer and dryer standing quietly. An old fish tank with nothing inside it. As I stepped in, I heard a soft sound come from above. Gentle, rhythmic, almost like a faint hiss brushing against the ceiling. It wasn't frightening, exactly. Just noticeable enough to make me pause and listen. Matt stepped in behind me, and I turned to him, searching his face for reassurance. "You heard that too, right?" I asked quietly. He nodded, calm and unbothered, and simply said, "Yeah, let's go." Back upstairs, the house seemed to breathe normally again. But something had shifted. Sitting there, controllers in our hands, Matt began to talk, not casually this time, but thoughtfully, as if he'd been waiting for someone to finally listen. Before moving to Florida, he told me he had lived in an old house in Georgia. When he was very young, he used to see a little girl there. She would appear quietly, never startling him, never frightening him. They spoke in simple ways, like children do. To him, it felt natural. His mother had noticed things too. Once, she heard one of his toys, a small remote-controlled car, moving around upstairs while Matt sat beside her at the kitchen table. She went up, turned it off, and thought nothing of it. When it happened again, she removed the batteries and placed it high on a shelf. Later, a soft crash echoed through the house. The toy had fallen to the floor, pushed just far enough to leave no easy explanation. The way Matt described it, there was no fear attached to these moments. Only curiosity, a sense of quiet company. Years later, while living in Costa Rica, he experienced something similar. The homes there were open, built around courtyards that carried sound easily through the night. One evening, while standing outside alone, he heard strange noises drifting from the far edge of the courtyard. Then close, very close, he heard a gentle voice whisper behind him, urging him to rest, assuring him that everything was fine. Sometimes, the most profound moments come quietly, almost like whispers across time. They don't announce themselves with thunder or bright lights. They simply appear, gentle and still, lingering long enough to leave an impression on the soul. I want to tell you about one such moment. It's a story that isn't meant to terrify, but to quietly remind us how love can sometimes stretch beyond the limits we expect, even across years and memory. It happened in a home bathed in the soft stillness of night. The air was calm, the kind of calm that makes every sound feel sharper, every shadow a little more defined. The house belonged to an elderly woman, whose life had been full of warmth, family, and the quiet routines that come with age. She was nearing the end of her days, and her family had arranged for someone to care for her at night. A young caretaker, barely out of her teens, had been entrusted with this responsibility. That night, the young woman moved quietly through the house, the soft padding of her slippers barely disturbing the silence. She checked on the grandmother before heading to her own small bedroom, hoping to make sure she was comfortable and at ease. But when she opened the door and stepped inside, she froze. Standing at the foot of the bed was a man. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light, but a person fully formed, as if he had always been there. He was in his 20s, with slicked back hair, a white shirt tucked neatly into blue jeans, sleeves rolled just so. One sleeve held something unexpected, cigarettes, carefully tucked away, like a small, personal signature. He wasn't threatening, not in the slightest, but there was a presence about him that made the room feel alive in a strange, hushed way. He looked at the grandmother with an intensity that was almost tangible, longing, tender, impossibly familiar. His eyes held a softness, a devotion that didn't belong to a stranger, yet no one else was there. The caretaker's heart beat faster, a gentle panic threading through her nerves. She took a step backward, then another, careful not to make a sound. Her instincts screamed to call for help, to protect herself, and she did. Quietly, she retreated, closed the door, and called 911, explaining that she had seen someone in the room. Fear had made her voice tremble slightly, but she was careful not to alarm the grandmother. The family would know soon enough. When the authorities arrived and checked the house, they found no one. The night remained undisturbed. The caretaker explained what she had seen in careful detail, describing the young man's appearance, the cigarettes, the way he looked at the grandmother. And as the family listened, their faces paled. They rushed to a box of old photographs, memories buried for years beneath layers of time. Finally, they unearthed one, a photograph that seemed almost impossible to believe. There he was, the young man from that night, captured decades ago. It was the grandmother's husband, in his mid-20s. The same slicked-back hair, the white shirt, the blue jeans, the cigarettes tucked neatly into his sleeve. And he was gazing at her with the exact same adoring, tender look that the caretaker had described. For a moment, time itself seemed to blur. Past and present folded together in a gentle, quiet embrace. There was no fear, only wonder. A love so strong, so enduring, that it seemed to reach across the years, touching the night softly, just to be near her once more. Eventually, the night settled again. The grandmother rested peacefully, unaware of the extraordinary reunion that had taken place. The caretaker stayed calm, holding the memory of what she had seen close, like a secret gift. And in the quiet of that house, under the soft watch of moonlight and the gentle hush of night, one could feel a subtle, unspoken truth. Love, in its purest form, never truly leaves. and as the house returned to its gentle stillness, the story drifted onward, a soft echo in the night, quietly waiting to be told again. Here is a fully rewritten, expanded, sleep-friendly horror narration, carefully paced in tone for black screen plus rain sounds videos, in the calm style of chilling lullabies. Some experiences don't arrive with a scream. They come quietly, like a shift in the air, or a feeling you can't explain. They leave no marks, no proof, only a memory that refuses to fade. This is one of those moments. A few years ago, during a long summer of travel, I spent my nights sleeping in the homes of people who generously opened their doors to strangers. Each place had its own rhythm, its own silence, its own way of settling after dark. Most nights blended together, but one house, one night, stayed with me. When my friend and I arrived that evening, the house felt warm and lived in. The kind of place where family photos line the walls and soft light spills from every room. The husband and wife welcomed us kindly. They spoke with pride about their family. 2 older sons serving in the military, and 2 younger daughters they had adopted years earlier from a distant tribal region. As we talked, the conversation drifted gently until the mother mentioned something unusual. She spoke calmly, almost casually, about how the girls had struggled when they were first brought to church. Not tantrums, not childish fear, but sudden, intense changes. Loud voices, screaming, movements that didn't match their usual gentle behavior. Outside of church, she said, the girls were kind and peaceful. Inside, something shifted. Over time, as the girls grew older and settled into their new life, the behavior stopped entirely. The parents believed the change had been spiritual. They spoke of it with certainty, not fear. I listened politely, nodded, and thought little of it. By the time we prepared for bed, the story had already slipped from my mind. The room we slept in was simple. A bunk bed pressed against one wall. Curtains drawn. The house quiet except for the distant creaks that all older homes make as they cool for the night. I climbed onto the top bunk, my friend settling below me. The mattress was thin, the air still. At first, everything felt normal. Then, slowly, the room began to feel different. Not cold, not dark, just off, as if the silence had thickened. I lay still, staring into the darkness, when I noticed a gentle movement beneath me. The bed wasn't jolting or rocking, just a soft, steady vibration, like a quiet tremor. At first, I assumed my friend had shifted in his sleep. I listened. He was breathing evenly. The movement continued. I called down to him in a low voice and asked if he was shaking the bed. Sleepy and confused, he answered no. I asked if he could feel it. He said he couldn't feel anything at all, but I could. The sensation was unmistakable. a slow, deliberate shaking, as if the bed itself were alive with motion. My heart beat a little faster, not from panic, but from confusion. I pulled the blanket closer, closed my eyes, and told myself it was nothing, just nerves, just exhaustion from travel. The room remained heavy. Eventually, despite the feeling, sleep came. Morning arrived quietly. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and ordinary. The house felt normal again. Over breakfast, I mentioned the night to my friend, half laughing, trying to shake it off. His expression changed. He admitted that he, too, had felt something wrong in the room, an unease he couldn't explain, even though nothing had touched him. Only then did I remember the story from the night before. I never saw anything. No shadows. No figures. No movement I could explain. And maybe that's why it stayed with me. Because whatever happened didn't need to be seen. It only needed to be felt. Some places carry memories. Some moments linger quietly, without demanding belief. And some nights pass gently, leaving behind a feeling that follows you long after the light returns. As the day moved on and we packed our bags, the house settled back into its calm rhythm, and the memory of that night faded into the background. Soft, distant, waiting, like the opening breath of another story yet to be told. Here is a fully rewritten, expanded, calm, sleep-friendly horror narration, carefully softened to remain non-graphic, peaceful, and immersive, while preserving the core events and tone. It is designed specifically for Black Screen Plus Rain Sounds YouTube sleep compilations, in the style of chilling lullabies. Some places don't announce themselves as dangerous. They don't creak loudly or whisper threats in the dark. They simply exist, heavy with a feeling you can't name. And slowly, night after night, they begin to wear you down. I've never believed in ghosts. Even now, I hesitate to call what happened supernatural. But there was a house I lived in once, a place that stayed with me long after I left it behind. For an entire year, it felt as though something unseen was quietly shaping our lives, nudging our thoughts, and pressing against us when the lights went out. Before we moved in, there were stories. The landlord mentioned them casually, almost like trivia. Years ago, the house had been used for things better left in the past. Before that, it had stood empty for a long time, sealed off from the world, collecting dust and silence. Nothing about it sounded officially documented, just fragments of rumor passed from tenant to tenant. Still, for college students with limited money and low expectations, don't ask many questions. When we first walked through the house, it felt abandoned even though it wasn't. Old wallpaper peeled away from the walls, revealing faded writing beneath it, words and symbols that no one had bothered to erase completely. Cobwebs filled the corners. Some rooms smelled stale, as if they hadn't been aired out in years. We laughed it off, calling it character, telling ourselves it would feel like home soon enough. It didn't. My room was the smallest. Barely more than a narrow space with a low ceiling and a tiny window that looked directly into a brick wall. The door never stayed shut unless I wedged something against it. The floor wasn't level either. There was a strange rise in the center, as if the house itself had shifted and frozen that way. On the first day, while unpacking, I found something broken and metallic tucked into a corner. I told myself it was nothing important. I didn't look too closely. There were faint, dark marks on the floor I hadn't noticed before. I covered them with a rug and moved on. The house made sounds constantly, not loud ones, just small, unsettling noises that never repeated the same way twice. One roommate swore he heard an animal barking through the air vents late at night. Another kept waking up to find his belongings moved slightly out of place. Even large items would shift, as if nudged when no one was watching. He began locking his door, recording the room while he slept, but the tapes never captured anything unusual. We all noticed shadows, not clear shapes, just movement at the edge of vision. A passing figure that vanished when you turned your head. It happened most often at night, when the hallways were dim and quiet, when the house felt like it was holding its breath. One afternoon, in full daylight, I heard what sounded like intense distress coming from the bathroom. The sound echoed faintly through the hallway, growing stronger as I approached. My heart pounded, not from terror, but confusion. When I reached the door and turned on the light, the sound stopped instantly. The room was empty. It happened again weeks later. Same time of day. Same silence afterward. Food spoiled unusually fast. Bread would turn stale and unusable almost overnight. Occasionally, the house filled with a thick, unpleasant smell that lingered without explanation. We blamed animals in the ceiling, though we never saw any. The attic remained locked the entire time we lived there. Every summer rain brought swarms of tiny insects into the yard. They slipped through cracks beneath the doors, filling the air with a soft, constant movement. No matter how often we cleaned, they returned. Then there were the things that only happened once. A knife appeared in the house one morning. None of us recognized it. No one claimed it. It simply existed, resting where it hadn't been before. One sink began to drip slowly, not water, but something darker. We stared at it in silence, then cleaned it up without speaking. It never happened again. The lights went out one by one evening, not all at once. Each room fell into darkness separately. The power returned minutes later, with no explanation. Once, after turning off the television, we caught a reflection in the black screen. A man standing behind us, wearing a hat. We turned immediately. Nothing was there. We heard a telephone ring late at night, an old mechanical sound that didn't match any device in the house. A window opened on its own. Footsteps crossed the roof, slow and steady, though no one was ever found. Even the kitchen felt wrong some mornings, marked by dark stains that couldn't be traced to any source. Eventually, we joked about it. We laughed, named the house, turned fear into humor. But the truth was quieter and harder to ignore. None of us slept well. Nightmares became routine. Tension settled between us, growing heavier with each passing month. One roommate stopped sleeping there altogether. When we finally moved out, the change was immediate. Our sleep improved. Our moods lifted. The constant weight we hadn't even realized we were carrying simply disappeared. I still don't know what that house was. I don't know what lingered there, or if it was ever anything more than a place shaped by too much history and too little peace. All I know is this: some houses don't need ghosts to feel haunted. And as the rain continues softly outside, and the night stretches on, another quiet story waits just beyond the dark, ready to unfold. Sometimes, even the smallest memories can hold shadows. Even when the years stretch far beyond them, the quiet weight of what was felt can linger. And sometimes, it's not the grown-ups who remember the details. It's the echoes of a child's fear, sharp and clear in the stillness of night. When I was 3, my twin and I spent a summer by the sea, in a little camping park just outside Liverpool, England. The city and countryside still carried the scars of the war, though it had ended 2 decades earlier. Burnt-out buildings, collapsed walls, and the faint scent of history clung to the air, blending with the briny tang of the ocean. We stayed in a small camper, narrow and compact, with tiny bedrooms at each end and a communal space in the center. My twin and I shared one end, while our parents slept at the other. The camper smelled faintly of salt, sun-warmed wood, and the lingering perfume of the summer flowers that grew along the edge of the park. Outside, the wind whispered gently through the grass, carrying the distant murmur of the waves. That night, something stirred. I woke screaming, my little body shaking, my voice barely carrying beyond the small walls of our room. In my mind there was a presence, the lady, a figure I could not escape. My parents later told me that even at 3 years old, I described her in chilling detail. A woman covered in blood, holding an axe, moving with intent toward us. I had never seen movies, never heard stories like this, and yet I saw her so clearly that my fear consumed me entirely. When my parents tried to take me to their side of the camper, I went frantic. I didn't want to leave my twin behind. My little arms reached out, my voice trembling as I called for him, desperate to protect him from her. The only way they could calm me was to bring both of us to their bed. There, pressed together, I spent the night trembling, eyes wide, staring at the small door that separated us from the shadows outside. Every sound, the creak of the camper floor, the hiss of the wind against the siding, felt amplified, each one a whisper of her approach. The morning arrived softly, the sun spilling pale light across the camper. I had forgotten the terror in the haze of sleep, but my parents had not. My father left to fetch cigarettes from the little store on the grounds, trying to regain a sense of normalcy after the long night. While there, he noticed something in the grass, an outline of a foundation, overgrown and quietly hidden among the swaying blades. Curious, he asked the shopkeeper about it, expecting perhaps some old wartime ruin. The answer startled him. "It wasn't the war," the man said softly. "It was a fire. Years ago, the owner of that house was killed by her husband. And she chopped him with a hatchet before the fire took the building." My father later said he could hardly stand. The weight of what had happened there, and the vivid fear I had felt only hours before, pressed upon him like a cold wind. Even now, 45 years later, my parents tell the story with quiet conviction. I do not remember it myself, not clearly, but somehow the camper, the shadows of that night, and the feeling of holding my twin close remain, hidden deep in a corner of memory. And sometimes, in the quiet hours just before sleep, I can almost feel it, the faint echo of a presence watching, reminding me that even small children sometimes glimpse the edges of something far older than we understand. And as the rain taps softly on the roof tonight, and the wind whispers against the window, there are more stories waiting, each one gentle and strange, ready to slip into the darkness beside you, for just long enough to be remembered. Sometimes, dreams do not fade when morning comes. They linger quietly, like warm air trapped in a closed room. And sometimes, a dream returns again and again, not to frighten you, but to remind you that something unfinished is still waiting. This is a story I carried silently throughout my childhood, never sharing it aloud because it felt too personal, too fragile to explain. Even now, it settles in my chest with a strange calm mixed with longing. It isn't a nightmare in the usual sense. There is no panic, no sudden fear. Only a gentle, repeating pull that followed me from sleep into waking life. To understand it, there is something important to know about my mother's family. We are Persian, and my great-grandmother gave birth to several sons, brothers who grew up bound by blood and history. There were many of them, 5 that I know of, and whenever they gathered in one place, there was a feeling that filled the room. Not something visible or spoken, but something you could sense. A shared presence. A quiet strength. As a child, I didn't have words for it, but I felt it deeply. That same feeling appears in my dream. The dream always begins the same way. I am moving upward, slowly and calmly. Sometimes it is a staircase, wide and clean, echoing softly beneath my steps. Other times it is an elevator, rising without sound, smooth and steady. There is no rush, no urgency. only a peaceful sense of going where I am meant to go. When I reach the top, the world opens in a way that feels impossible yet completely natural. I am standing high above everything, as if on the roof of a tall building in a city like New York. But instead of concrete and lights, there is a vast tropical landscape stretching endlessly in front of me. Thick green jungle, tall trees swaying gently, and above it all, a bright sun glowing warmly, not harsh or blinding, but comforting. The air feels alive there, warm, quiet, filled with stillness. And that is when I see him. A man stands near the edge, looking out at the sun. I cannot tell you exactly what his face looks like, because the details are never sharp. But I know him. Not in the way you recognize a stranger, but in the way you recognize family without being told. He carries the same presence as my mother's uncles, the same calm gravity, the same familiar energy that feels older than memory. As I step closer, a realization settles gently into my mind. He could be one of them, a brother from that family. A man connected to me by blood and time. When that understanding arrives, there is no fear. We simply smile at each other, quietly, warmly, as if no words are needed. We stand together, watching the sun. Then, without warning and without sadness, he begins to fade. Not vanish suddenly, but dissolve softly into the light, as if he belongs there. I don't reach for him. I don't cry out. I simply accept it. After he is gone, I turn around and begin to descend, moving back down the same way I came. The dream ends there. What happens after is what truly stays with me. When I wake up, my body feels heavy and alert at the same time. My mind fills with one overwhelming thought. I have to find him. The feeling is intense but quiet, like a deep internal call. It isn't panic. It isn't fear. It is certainty. As if somewhere in the real world, this man exists, waiting to be found. I have never experienced anything like it with any other dream. Not before, not since. The urge is so strong that it feels almost physical, pulsing beneath my skin. And yet, as the hours pass and sleep eventually returns, the feeling fades. Not completely, but enough to let me move on. Until the dream comes again. This continued throughout my childhood, repeating at intervals, always the same, always gentle, always leaving me with that quiet ache when I woke. What makes it unsettling is something I learned later. One of my mother's uncles disappeared during the Iran-Iraq War decades ago. He never returned. His body was never found. No letters. No calls. No closure. He was declared missing in action. A life paused forever in uncertainty. When I learned that, the dream changed in my memory, even though it never changed in shape. the man in the sunlight, the familiar presence, the calm farewell. Suddenly, the longing I felt upon waking made a different kind of sense. Not frightening, just sad, quiet, and unresolved. I still don't know what the dream means. I don't try to explain it as something supernatural or mystical. Maybe it was my mind processing stories I heard too young to understand. Maybe it was memory, imagination, and emotion weaving together during sleep. Or maybe it was simply the echo of someone who was never allowed to say goodbye. What I do know is that the dream never harmed me. It never scared me. It felt peaceful, even comforting, like standing in warm sunlight with someone who wanted nothing more than to be remembered. And as this story slowly drifts to a close, the image of that quiet place remains. The gentle rise upward, the open sky, the soft disappearance into light. Somewhere between sleep and waking, there are many more stories like this, calm, strange, and unfinished, waiting patiently to surface, one by one, as the night continues. Some houses do not announce themselves loudly. They whisper through walls, through dreams, through the quiet moments when no one is watching. And sometimes, the smallest voices are the ones that carry the longest memories. When I was very young, my father's work required our family to move often, drifting from one state to another like leaves caught in a gentle current. I was 5 years old then, my sister just a year younger, still small enough to believe that every new place could become home if we tried hard enough. That belief followed us to a small town in Virginia, where we rented an old house on a narrow road called Church Street. The house itself seemed peaceful at first glance. Its paint was faded, the wood slightly warped from age, but it stood quietly beneath tall trees that filtered the sunlight into soft patterns on the ground. The neighborhood was calm, the kind of place where afternoons felt slow and evenings settled in gently. My parents believed it would be a good place to pause for a while, to let us feel steady after so many moves. Inside, the house carried the subtle scent of old wood and dust warmed by sunlight. Floors creaked softly when you walked across them, not sharply, but like the building was sighing with every step. My sister and I shared a room, our beds placed close together, comforted by the idea that we were never alone at night. It didn't take long for something to change. Almost immediately after we moved in, both my sister and I began having night terrors. Children sometimes have bad dreams, so at first, my parents weren't alarmed. But these weren't ordinary nightmares. When they came fully, deeply, pulling us somewhere far away from the safety of our room. We would scream for our mother, our voices frantic and raw, yet when she rushed in and tried to hold us, we fought against her touch as if she were a stranger. Our eyes were open, but we didn't seem to see her. We couldn't be woken. No matter how gently or urgently she tried, we remained trapped in whatever world our minds had entered. The most unsettling part was that my sister and I were dreaming the same things. Night after night, our cries echoed with the same words. We spoke about people who were dead, about being surrounded by them, about a deep, overwhelming fear that we were going to die too. We begged not to die, sobbing with a desperation far heavier than what should have lived in children so young. My mother was shaken to her core. She was a practical woman, steady and grounded, not someone easily frightened by stories or coincidence. But watching her daughters scream in terror, unreachable, night after night, broke something inside her. Eventually, she spoke to our neighbors, hoping for reassurance or explanation. What she received instead was silence, followed by uneasy glances. Church Street, they told her, had not always been a street. Long before houses lined it, the land had belonged to the town's church. And during a devastating outbreak of cholera centuries earlier, death had come faster than the town could bury its people. When the cemetery filled, a large pit was dug nearby. Bodies were placed there together, without markers, without names. Years passed. The land was repurposed. The mass grave was covered, paved over, and eventually became a quiet residential street. Life continued, as it always does, built gently on top of what came before. After hearing this, my mother didn't sleep well anymore. She watched us constantly, listening to our breathing, waiting for night to come with dread rather than rest. In her heart, she believed that my sister and I were somehow brushing against echoes left behind, that our dreams were not entirely our own. She later said she felt as though something was trying to speak through us, not to hurt us, but to be remembered. 2 small lives lost long ago, confused and afraid, reaching out in the only way they could. Whether that was true or not, my mother reached her limit. She demanded we leave that house, that street, that town. She told my father she would not stay another night there. And soon after, we moved away. The night terrors stopped. Slowly, quietly, they faded into memory. Today, my mother rarely speaks about that time. When she does, her voice grows soft, distant, as if she's careful not to disturb something that has finally gone quiet. I don't remember the dreams myself, only the stories she tells, the fear she still carries. And as this memory settles back into silence, it leaves behind a gentle reminder. Some places remember us long after we leave. Some stories rest beneath our feet, waiting patiently, until the night is calm enough for them to rise and drift softly into the next. The first time my father told me this story, it was late at night, the kind of hour when the world feels quieter and words seem heavier than usual. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the house was dim except for a small lamp near the couch. He didn't tell it dramatically. There were no raised voices or dramatic pauses. He spoke calmly, almost casually, which somehow made it feel more real. It was the kind of story you remember not because it shocks you, but because it settles into your thoughts and refuses to leave. My father said this story came from my grandfather, a man who was not known for exaggeration or fantasy. He was practical, steady, the type of person who believed in what he could see and touch. He didn't talk much about mysteries or conspiracy theories, and he never chased strange ideas. That's why this story stood out so clearly to my dad, and later to me. My grandfather once knew a man I'll call Bob. Bob was an ordinary guy on the surface. He dressed simply, spoke carefully, and never tried to draw attention to himself. The only thing that set him apart was where he worked. Bob was employed at a place he almost never spoke about, a place everyone has heard of but few truly understand. Area 51. According to my grandfather, Bob was very strict about keeping his work to himself. Whenever someone joked about aliens or secret experiments, Bob would smile politely and change the subject. He would say it was against regulations to talk about work, and that was that. No matter how many times people tried to push him, he never slipped. For years, my grandfather accepted this as just part of who Bob was. They became friends in a simple way. They worked in the same general area, shared drinks now and then, and talked about everyday things. Sports, money, family, small complaints about life. Bob never acted strange. He never seemed paranoid or nervous. If anything, he seemed calm, maybe a little distant at times, but not unusual. Then one night, everything changed. My grandfather and Bob met at their usual bar, a quiet place with low lighting and old wooden tables that had seen decades of conversations. The kind of bar where people went to unwind, not to be seen. That night, they drank more than usual. Time stretched out, and the noise around them softened into background sound. At some point, the conversation drifted, as it often does when alcohol loosens the tongue. That's when Bob started talking. At first, my grandfather didn't notice anything unusual. Bob spoke slowly, carefully, as if testing the words before letting them leave his mouth. Then he mentioned Area 51, not jokingly, not vaguely, directly. My grandfather was surprised. Bob had never brought it up before, not once. Bob started by saying that most people had no idea what really went on there. He talked about creatures that were not human, about aircraft that didn't move like anything known to the public. He spoke about experiments, about technology so advanced it would change the world if people knew about it. He talked about secrecy, about rules that were enforced not just by law, but by fear. My grandfather listened, but he didn't take it very seriously. He assumed Bob was drunk and letting his imagination run wild. People say strange things after too many drinks. My grandfather nodded, laughed a little, and didn't press for details. He didn't ask questions. He didn't challenge Bob or encourage him. He just let him talk. Bob didn't seem excited or proud as he spoke. There was no thrill in his voice. If anything, there was a quiet heaviness, like someone who had carried something for too long and finally set it down, even if only for a moment. By the end of the night, the conversation drifted back to normal topics. They paid their tabs, stood up a little unsteadily, and said their goodbyes. They agreed to meet again later that week. Same bar, same time. Just like always. Nothing about that night seemed important at the time. When the day came to meet again, my grandfather arrived at the bar first. He ordered a drink and waited. The bar slowly filled with regulars. Music played softly. Glasses clinked. Time passed. Bob never showed up. At first, my grandfather wasn't worried. Maybe Bob was running late. Maybe something came up. He finished his drink and waited longer. Still nothing. After a while, he left, assuming they'd catch up another time. Days passed. My grandfather tried calling Bob. No answer. He left messages that were never returned. He asked around, but no one had seen Bob. No one knew where he was. His phone went silent. His house stayed dark. It was as if Bob had vanished. Weeks turned into months. My grandfather never heard from him again. No goodbye. No explanation. No trace. It wasn't just that Bob stopped showing up at the bar. He stopped existing in the lives of everyone who knew him. What unsettled my grandfather most was not the disappearance itself, but the timing. Bob had never talked about his work before. Not once in all the years they knew each other. And the one night he did, the one night he broke his silence, was the last time anyone ever saw him. My grandfather never claimed to know what happened. He didn't jump to conclusions or make dramatic statements. He simply told the story as it was. He said that Bob talked, and then Bob was gone. My father said my grandfather didn't like discussing it. Whenever it came up, he would grow quiet and change the subject. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like acceptance. Like he had seen something he didn't fully understand and had no desire to understand further. When my father told me this story, he didn't say he believed it proved anything. He didn't claim it confirmed aliens or secret government programs. He just said it was strange. Too strange to forget. I've thought about it many times since then, especially late at night, when the world feels thin and distant. I think about Bob, sitting in that bar, finally speaking about something he was never meant to share. I think about how calm he must have felt in that moment, and how heavy the silence must have been afterward. Maybe Bob moved away. Maybe something ordinary happened. Maybe there's a simple explanation that no one ever found. Or maybe there are places in this world where silence is enforced in ways we don't understand. Maybe some stories are allowed to be told only once. As I think about it now, the image that stays with me is not the idea of aliens or secret bases. It's the idea of a man who carried something alone for years, let it slip out during one unguarded night, and then disappeared from the story entirely. And as this thought fades, the room feels quiet again, calm and still, as if the world itself is gently reminding us that not every mystery asks to be solved. Some simply linger, waiting softly in the background, as one story ends and another quietly begins. The weekend my parents planned that trip, it felt like one of those quiet family moments that stays with you forever, even before anything unusual happens. They wanted to take my younger sister and me away for a short break, just 2 nights, somewhere calm and different from our everyday routine. When they told us we were staying at Monresa Castle, they didn't explain much. They just said it was an old place, full of history, and that it would be a nice change of scenery. That was all I needed to hear. Even as a kid, I loved old buildings. I loved places that felt like they had stories pressed into their walls, places that had stood still while generations passed through them. The idea of staying somewhere historic filled me with excitement long before we even arrived. I remember looking out the car window as we drove, imagining stone hallways, tall windows, and quiet corners that had seen centuries of life. When we finally arrived, the building felt heavy in a way I couldn't quite explain. Not bad, exactly. Just old. Solid. Like it had been standing there watching the world change for a very long time. The air felt cooler near the walls, and even the silence seemed different, deeper somehow. I felt a small thrill run through me as we walked inside, my footsteps echoing softly on the floors. My parents checked us in, and we were shown to our rooms. They had booked one room for themselves and another for my sister and me. Their room was down the hall, closer to the end. It looked newer, or at least more updated. Their bathroom was attached directly to their room, which made it feel cozy and self-contained. My sister and I were placed in a room closer to the middle of the hallway, directly across from the staircase. Our bathroom was not inside the room itself. It was further down the hall, on the way to our parents' room. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. Lots of old buildings are laid out strangely, and I didn't think twice about it. But from the very beginning, something about that bathroom made me uncomfortable. I didn't even have a clear reason. It wasn't dirty. It didn't smell strange. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. Still, the first time I went in, I felt a sudden sense of unease. The air felt thick, like it wasn't moving properly. The light seemed slightly dimmer than it should have been, even when fully on. I rushed through what I needed to do and left as quickly as possible. After that, I refused to use it. Every time I needed to go, I would walk all the way to my parents' room instead. They laughed it off at first, thinking I was just being dramatic or picky, but I was firm. Something about that bathroom made my skin prickle, and I couldn't explain it in words that made sense. I just knew I didn't want to be in there. That first night, I had trouble sleeping. I've always been a night owl, even when I was younger, and falling asleep in a new place was never easy for me. Our room felt too warm, like the heat was trapped inside the old walls. A street light outside cast a steady glow through the window, and I couldn't escape it no matter how I shifted the curtains. The walls and doors were thin, and I could hear other guests returning to their rooms. Their footsteps echoed softly down the hallway. I heard quiet laughter, muffled conversations, and the gentle sound of people reminding each other to keep their voices down. It was all normal, but in the stillness of the night, every sound felt louder. Eventually, the hallway grew quiet. The voices faded. The footsteps stopped. I checked the time and saw it was around midnight. I was just starting to drift toward sleep when I heard it. The doorknob began to move. It wasn't loud. Just a soft jiggling sound, like someone testing the handle. My eyes flew open. My heart started to beat faster, not in panic, but in confusion. I hadn't heard anyone approach our door. There were no footsteps, no whispers, nothing that suggested someone was standing there. Still, the handle moved again. I sat up slightly and called out, trying to sound calm. I asked if anyone was there. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. The movement stopped immediately. My sister stirred beside me, clearly annoyed at being woken up. She asked what I was doing. I asked if she had heard the door. She said no, turned over, and fell back asleep almost instantly. I lay there for a long time after that, staring at the door. Nothing else happened. No more sounds. No footsteps walking away. Just silence. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, but it was a restless sleep. The next day passed quietly. We explored the grounds, ate meals together, and enjoyed the novelty of being somewhere different. In the daylight, everything felt normal again. The castle looked beautiful in the sun, and my unease from the night before faded into the background. That evening, our last night there, I was in my parents' room. I had just finished showering and was getting ready for bed. My parents were watching a documentary about Star Wars, something my dad loved and had passed on to me. I curled up with them, happy and relaxed, feeling safe. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. It came from the wall, sharp and sudden, making all of us jump. My parents' room was at the end of the hall, and the wall the sound came from was shared with another room. We assumed it was just the neighbors reacting to the TV volume. Maybe they were trying to get our attention. We lowered the sound and laughed a little, muttering that a knock on the door would have worked just fine. After that, the night went on without incident, and eventually we all went to sleep. The next morning, over breakfast, my dad mentioned something strange. While brushing his teeth earlier, he had overheard the people in the neighboring room talking. One of them asked if the other had heard that loud bang during the night. The other said yes, and they both wondered what it could have been. They hadn't knocked on our wall. That small detail stayed with me, even though I didn't fully understand why at the time. After breakfast, it was time to check out. As my parents handled the paperwork, I wandered into the lobby, where I noticed a display I hadn't paid attention to before. There were books laid out, filled with handwritten notes and stories. Curious, I picked one up and started reading. They were accounts from guests. Stories about strange sounds, unexplained feelings, moments that didn't quite make sense. My stomach tightened as I flipped through the pages. This wasn't just an old building with history. People believed it was haunted. One story stopped me cold. It mentioned the bathroom near the stairs, the same one I had refused to use. According to the account, a man and his young son had once been walking up the stairs when they heard someone crying inside the bathroom. The crying sounded deep and full of sadness. They knocked on the door, asking if everything was okay. The crying continued, unchanged. Concerned, they went to get a staff member to unlock the door. When the door was opened, the crying stopped. The room was empty, but the floor was covered in tissues, scattered everywhere. I felt a chill run through me as I read that. It explained nothing, and yet it explained everything. The feeling I had in that bathroom suddenly made sense in a way I didn't want it to. Another story talked about a room at the opposite end of the hall from my parents' room, a tower room with a long and heavy history. Guests had reported waking up feeling watched. Some described pressure on their chest or back, as if the air itself had grown heavier while they slept. The details were vague, but the emotion behind them was clear. The building, once a monastery, had known deep sorrow long before it became a hotel. Over time, tragic events had left their mark, and some people believed those moments still lingered, echoing softly through the halls. I put the book down and stepped away, my excitement about history replaced with a quiet unease. We checked out shortly after that and drove away, the castle growing smaller in the distance. The moment we left the property, I felt lighter, like something had been released. My sister seemed fine, unaware of any of it. My parents didn't bring it up, and neither did I. Years later, I still think about that weekend. About the door handle moving in the middle of the night. About the bang on the wall that no one caused. About the bathroom I instinctively avoided. None of it was dramatic or violent. There were no apparitions, no screams, no clear explanations. Just feelings. sounds, small moments that didn't quite fit. And sometimes, when I think about old buildings and the lives that once filled them, I wonder how much of the past truly ever leaves. Maybe some places remember more than we think. Maybe they hold on to quiet emotions, releasing them gently, like whispers, only to those who are listening. As that thought settles, the story fades softly into the background, making space for the next one to begin, calm and quiet, like footsteps echoing down a long, empty hall. Every summer, without fail, I spend part of my vacation in Maine. It has been that way for as long as I can remember. My grandparents live there, right in the middle of the state, far away from cities and highways. The area is quiet and spread out, the kind of place where dirt roads are more common than paved ones, and where many houses sit empty, slowly being taken back by nature. It is peaceful, but it also has a loneliness to it that you don't really notice until you've been there long enough. My grandparents' house is surrounded by trees and open land. At night, the sounds are different from what you hear anywhere else. No traffic, no distant sirens, no constant hum of people. Instead, there are insects, wind moving through leaves, and the occasional call of an animal somewhere far off. It is beautiful during the day, but at night, the darkness feels deeper, thicker, like it has weight. On the same dirt road as my grandparents' house, there is an old cemetery. It is small, fenced in, and sits quietly in the middle of an open field. A little farther down the road, past the cemetery, there is an abandoned house. It is very old, much smaller than modern homes, and has been empty for as long as I can remember. Even my grandparents, who lived there years before I started visiting regularly, cannot tell me when anyone last lived in it. No one talks about it much. It's just there, slowly falling apart, as if time forgot it. Last year, I was up in Maine with a group of friends during senior week. It was one of those trips where everything feels a little more intense because you know a chapter of your life is ending. There were 4 of us in total, and aside from me, they were all guys. One night, after the sun had fully gone down and the sky had cleared, they decided it would be a good idea to walk down the road to see the abandoned house. They thought it would be fun, something to do, something to talk about later. I didn't like the idea at first. I knew that house was unsafe. It had warning signs posted, and there was a barbed wire fence around the property. The structure itself looked like it could collapse at any moment. I also knew my friends well enough to worry that if I wasn't there, they might do something reckless, like try to climb the fence or get too close. So even though every instinct in me said to stay behind, I went along anyway, telling myself I would just keep an eye on them. That night, the moon was full and incredibly bright. It hung low in the sky, casting silver light over everything. Before we left, I walked down toward the edge of the woods near my grandparents' house. Half joking and half serious, I picked up 2 wooden stakes from the ground. I told myself it was just for humor, but there was a part of me that liked having something solid in my hands. We only had 2 flashlights between the 4 of us, but with the moon shining so brightly, we barely needed them. We started walking down the dirt road, our footsteps soft against the ground. The air was cool, and everything felt very still. When we reached the cemetery, the guys wanted to stop. Surprisingly, it didn't scare me much. The moonlight lit up the entire field, and we could see everything clearly. There were no deep shadows, no hidden corners. It felt quiet, almost calm. After a few minutes, we continued down the road toward the abandoned house. To get there, you have to pass a small farm. It's not a large operation, just a few animals and a modest house. The owners keep a light on in their yard at night for security, but it doesn't reach very far. The abandoned house sits roughly 1,000 feet beyond the edge of that light. As we walked away from the safety of that glow and into the darker stretch of road, something changed. The moment we stepped out of the light, a sudden chill ran through me. It wasn't just cold air. It was the kind of feeling that starts deep in your chest and spreads outward. My skin prickled, and my stomach tightened. The atmosphere felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Almost immediately, the guys lost their confidence. They slowed down, started talking about going back, laughing nervously and making excuses. At that point, we were only about 30 feet away from where the abandoned house would come into view. We weren't planning to go onto the property. We just wanted to see it, to stand there and look. I didn't want to turn back after coming that far. So I stepped forward, brushing past them, deciding that if anyone was going to be brave, it might as well be me. As I moved ahead, I lifted my flashlight and did one last sweep of the area, just to be sure nothing unexpected was nearby. I knew the farm well. I knew there were cows, cats, and horses there. Earlier that day, I had seen a horse standing calmly in its paddock. Because of that, I had already checked the area when we first passed the farm, making sure the horse wasn't close enough to startle us. I remembered clearly that the paddock was empty. There was nothing there. As I moved forward and swept the flashlight again, the beam landed on something that made my blood freeze. Standing just beyond the edge of the light was a massive shape. It was tall, far taller than any animal I expected to see there. Its body was covered in thick, dark hair, and it stood upright in a way that didn't make sense. The flashlight caught its eyes, and they reflected back at me, glowing brightly. They were set at the front of its head, staring directly at me. For a split second, my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. It didn't look like a horse. It didn't move like a horse. It didn't stand like a horse. The shape felt wrong, unnatural, like something that didn't belong in that quiet rural landscape. I screamed. The sound tore out of me before I could stop it, sharp and panicked. My scream was enough to send the guys running without even stopping to see what I was looking at. They turned and bolted back down the road, their footsteps pounding against the dirt. I stood there frozen for a moment, my heart racing, my hands shaking. When I finally turned and ran after them, my legs felt weak, like they might give out at any second. Later, when we were safely back at my grandparents' house, the guys laughed it off. They told me it was just the horse, that I had scared myself in the dark. They tried to reassure me, but I couldn't accept it. I have spent my entire life around horses. I have ridden them, trained them, cared for them. I know how they look in daylight and in darkness. I know how their eyes reflect light. What I saw that night was not a horse. The detail that stays with me the most, even now, is the eyes. Horses' eyes are set on the sides of their heads. What I saw had eyes facing forward, fixed directly on me, watching. To this day, I don't walk down that road at night anymore. I still visit Maine every year, and I still love the quiet and the space and the way time seems to slow down there. But some places hold memories that don't fade, no matter how much you want them to. Sometimes, when the moon is full and bright, and the woods are quiet, I find myself thinking about that moment. About how the darkness seemed to come alive just beyond the reach of the light. And I wonder how many things exist just outside our vision, waiting patiently for someone to notice them. Some stories are not told loudly. They are passed down in quiet voices, usually late at night, when the house is calm and the world feels distant. These are the kinds of stories that stay with you, not because they shock you in the moment, but because they slowly sink into your thoughts and refuse to leave. This is one of those stories, shared with me by my grandmother, and remembered again years later through something that happened in my own family. My grandmother's uncle was a trader many decades ago, long before paved roads and cars reached every corner of the region. He lived and worked near the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, in an area where the land stretches endlessly and the desert seems to breathe with a life of its own. In those days, travel was slow and demanding. He relied on camels and donkeys to carry his goods from one place to another, moving carefully across familiar paths etched into the sand by years of footsteps and hooves. The desert at night is very different from the desert during the day. My grandmother described it as both peaceful and unsettling. The heat fades, the wind cools the air, and the sky opens up in a way that makes you feel very small. The stars shine brighter than anywhere else, and the silence becomes so deep that even the softest sound feels loud. One night, her uncle was traveling alone. He had 2 camels and a single donkey with him, moving at a steady pace through the dark. There was no moon that night, only starlight guiding his way. The animals walked calmly, familiar with the route, their steps slow and rhythmic. Everything felt normal, quiet, and almost comforting in its sameness. Then he heard his name. It was clear, spoken softly, as if carried by the wind. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. The desert can do that, especially when you're tired and alone. But then he heard it again. His name, spoken from somewhere behind him. He stopped. The animals slowed and came to a halt, sensing the change in his movement. He turned around, expecting perhaps another traveler, or someone who had followed him unnoticed. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. In the distance stood beings unlike anything he had ever seen. They were tall beyond reason, so tall that their heads seemed to disappear into the clouds above. Their shapes were dark against the night sky, unmoving, silent. He could not make out clear features, only their impossible height and the feeling that they were aware of him, watching him. Fear took over instantly. It wasn't the sharp kind that makes you scream. It was deeper, heavier, pressing into his chest and making it hard to breathe. Without thinking, he abandoned the camels where they stood. He grabbed the donkey and fled, urging it forward with every ounce of strength he had. The journey felt endless. His body ached, and with every step, pain spread through him in a way he had never experienced before. By the time he reached his sister's house, hours later, he was barely able to stand. His face was pale, his breath shallow, and his entire body trembled. He told them what he had seen. His voice was weak, strained, but clear. He spoke of the voice calling his name, of the towering figures in the desert, and of the fear that chased him all the way home. He said he felt broken inside, as if something had touched him in a way that should never have happened. Within 2 hours, he was gone. In their culture, burial happens quickly. When they prepared his body, they discovered something that none of them could explain. Across his back was a single handprint. One hand, impossibly large, stretched from his right thigh all the way up to his left shoulder. The mark was clear, unmistakable, as if pressed deeply into his skin. No one spoke much about it after that. Some things, my grandmother said, are not meant to be discussed openly. They are remembered quietly, carried forward as warnings rather than stories. Years later, something happened in my own family that brought her words back to me in a way I never expected. My brother was an infant at the time, still so small and fragile. Almost overnight, his behavior changed. He stopped eating. He cried endlessly when the lights were on, his tiny body stiff with discomfort. But when the lights were turned off and my parents left the room, he became quiet. Too quiet. Sometimes, my parents would stand outside the door and listen. In the darkness, they could hear him making soft sounds, like baby talk, but it didn't feel playful. It felt directed, as if he were responding to something unseen. When my parents entered the room, the sound stopped immediately. He would lie there in the dark, silent and still, as if nothing had happened. Days passed. and his condition worsened. He refused milk completely. He grew weak, and the fear in my parents' hearts grew stronger with each passing hour. Doctors found nothing physically wrong. There was no explanation that made sense. Finally, they turned to a Muslim exorcist. The process was quiet, focused, and intense in a way that didn't rely on shouting or force. Prayers were spoken softly, steadily, filling the room with a calm that felt heavy and protective at the same time. My brother cried during parts of it, then fell silent again. When it was over, something changed. Almost immediately, he began to drink milk, bottle after bottle, as if he had been starving for days. He drank 3 full bottles and then continued, nursing until my mother was completely drained. He had not eaten properly in nearly 3 days, and yet now he was calm, content, and finally at peace. After that, everything returned to normal. He slept. He ate. He laughed. It was as if whatever had been there was gone, leaving no trace behind. My family doesn't talk about these things often, not because they don't believe them, but because belief sometimes makes them feel too real. These stories sit quietly in the background of our lives, surfacing only in moments of stillness. Sometimes, late at night, when the lights are low and the house is quiet, I think about the desert and the towering figures beneath the clouds. I think about how thin the line is between what we see and what we don't. And I remind myself that not everything in this world needs to be understood to be respected. As the night grows deeper and the silence settles around you, let this story fade gently into the background, like a distant memory carried on the wind, making space for the next quiet whisper waiting to be told. There are some memories from childhood that never fully fade. They don't stay sharp or clear, but they linger like a soft shadow in the back of your mind, quietly returning during moments of silence. This is one of those memories for me. I was very young, maybe 6 or 7, and even now, I can still feel the strange mix of fear and confusion that wrapped itself around that night. Our house felt different when the adults weren't around. It wasn't just quiet, it was hollow, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. That night, my parents were either not home yet or already asleep upstairs. I don't remember exactly which, only that they weren't there to make the house feel safe. My little brother was upstairs, sitting close to the television, completely absorbed in whatever cartoon was playing. He was about 4 years old, small and unaware of how heavy the silence felt to me. I needed to use the bathroom, and unfortunately, it was downstairs. The downstairs area had always scared us when we were alone. It wasn't anything dramatic or obviously threatening. It was just dark. The stairs led straight down to the bathroom door, which was at least comforting because it meant you didn't have to look around much. But to the left of the stairs was a hallway that seemed to swallow light. There was no light switch at the top or bottom of the stairs for that hallway. During the day, it looked normal. At night, it felt endless. My brother and I had a routine. Whenever we needed to go downstairs alone, we ran. No walking, no stopping, no looking around. You ran down, did what you had to do, and ran back up as fast as your legs could carry you. That night was no different. I remember standing at the top of the stairs for a moment, listening. The TV noise drifted down faintly from upstairs, distorted and far away. The rest of the house was silent. I took a breath and ran down the stairs, my feet hitting each step quickly, almost slipping. I rushed into the bathroom and shut the door behind me, relieved to be somewhere enclosed. The bathroom light felt too bright against the darkness outside the door. I finished quickly, my heart already beating fast, knowing I'd have to step back into the hallway area again. When I opened the door, I was already preparing myself to sprint back upstairs without looking anywhere else. But something made me pause. As I stepped out, I glanced to my right, toward the dark hallway we always avoided. And that's when I saw it. Floating there, about 2 feet off the ground, was something I had never seen before. It wasn't transparent, and it wasn't solid in the way furniture or walls are solid. It was an orb, large and round, about as big as I was back then. It filled the hallway space completely, blocking my view of the far end. I couldn't see past it at all. It was mostly white, but not a flat white. Inside it, colors moved slowly, like soft swirls, circular patterns blending into each other. Pale blues, faint yellows, hints of something warmer that I couldn't quite name. The light it gave off wasn't harsh or blinding. It was calm, steady, and somehow very present. Time felt strange in that moment. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt longer than it probably was. I didn't hear anything. The house didn't creak. The television upstairs seemed impossibly far away. All I could focus on was that shape, hovering quietly in the darkness. Fear hit me all at once. Not the kind that makes you scream, but the kind that turns your stomach cold and tells you to run before you even understand why. I didn't think. I didn't question it. I just turned and ran. I ran up the stairs faster than I ever had before, my hands grabbing the railing, my feet barely touching the steps. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down until I reached the top and threw myself into the light and noise of the living room upstairs. My brother looked at me like I was crazy. I was breathing hard, my face probably pale, my eyes wide. I tried to explain what I had seen, but the words came out messy and rushed. An orb. Like colors. The hallway. He didn't really understand, not fully, but he listened. That should have been the end of it. Just a strange moment. Maybe my imagination playing tricks on me in the dark. That's what I tried to tell myself. But it wasn't. Sometime later, maybe weeks or months, I don't remember exactly when. I found myself looking down that same hallway again. The house was quiet, the lighting similar, the feeling in the air familiar. And this time, what I saw was different. There was a figure standing there. It was faint, barely there, like a reflection you only see out of the corner of your eye. It looked like a woman. She was wearing what seemed to be a dress, long and flowing, though the details were blurred, as if she wasn't fully part of the space. Her shape was pale, almost blending into the darkness rather than standing out against it. She wasn't moving toward me. She wasn't reaching out or making any sound. She was just there, occupying the same spot where I had seen the orb before. The feeling I got was the same deep, quiet fear, mixed with confusion. I didn't understand what I was seeing, and I didn't know what it meant. Again, I ran. After that, I avoided the downstairs whenever I could. I waited until someone else was home. I asked my parents to walk with me if I needed to go down there at night. Eventually, life moved on, and the house felt less threatening as I got older. My brother later told me that he had seen something too, though his memories were less clear. He might have been influenced by what I told him. Kids share fears easily, and stories grow in young minds. I've always kept that possibility in the back of my head. My parents never saw anything. They never experienced anything strange, and they didn't believe us. They brushed it off as imagination, childhood fear, shadows playing tricks on our eyes. I don't blame them. If I hadn't seen it myself, I probably wouldn't believe it either. The strange thing is, even now, I don't really believe in ghosts. I've always been practical, logical. I look for explanations. I know how powerful the mind can be, especially a child's mind in the dark. I know fear can create images that feel real. But I also know what I saw. I can still picture the soft swirl of colors inside that orb. I can still remember how the hallway disappeared behind it, how the air felt thick and still. I can still see the faint outline of the woman, standing quietly, not threatening, but not normal either. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was light reflecting in a strange way. Maybe it was a half-dream state, my mind filling in the darkness with something it didn't understand. Or maybe it was something else entirely. As an adult, I don't dwell on it too much. I don't search for answers. I've learned that some memories don't need to be solved. They just exist, like quiet echoes from a time when the world felt bigger and more mysterious. Sometimes, when the house is silent late at night and the lights are low, I think about that hallway. I think about how fear can be gentle and slow, not always loud or violent. How some of the creepiest moments are also the calmest. And as that thought settles, I let it drift away, like a soft shadow fading into the dark, making room for sleep, and for the next quiet story waiting just beyond the edge of the night. Some stories don't come from our own memories, but they still settle into our minds as if we lived them ourselves. This is one of those stories. It was told to me by my best friend, late one night, in a quiet voice, the kind people use when they aren't trying to scare you, but can't forget what they experienced. Even now, when I think about it, the feeling is soft but unsettling, like remembering a strange dream that never fully fades. At the time, my friend was working as a pizza delivery driver. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and she was used to being on the road at odd hours. Most nights were the same. Long stretches of empty roads, the hum of the engine, the smell of cardboard boxes, and the soft glow of the dashboard lighting up the inside of her car. She told me she actually liked the quiet of it. Driving alone at night gave her time to think, time to let her mind wander while the world slept. This happened in Jefferson City, Tennessee, an area surrounded by long country roads and open land. These roads weren't busy highways. They were narrow, dark stretches that cut through fields and trees, with very few streetlights and almost no traffic late at night. When you drove there after midnight, it felt like you were moving through a space that didn't belong to anyone at all. That night, she had finished her last delivery and was heading home. She was tired, ready to get out of her uniform and crawl into bed. The radio was playing softly, nothing loud or distracting. The windows were up, and the air inside the car felt still and calm. She was driving at a steady pace, comfortable and familiar with the road. She told me that at first, nothing felt strange. The road ahead was clear, the darkness broken only by her headlights stretching forward into the night. Trees lined the sides, their shapes blurring together as she passed. The sky was dark, with no moon bright enough to light the way. It was just her car and the road, moving forward together. And then, in a single moment, everything changed. Out of nowhere, she saw a person step into the road. There was no warning. No shape standing at the side first. No movement in the distance. 1 second the road was empty, and the next, there was someone directly in front of her car. Close enough that there was no time to slow down, no time to swerve, no time to even fully understand what she was seeing. Her heart jumped into her throat. Instinct took over. She braced for the impact that never came. Instead of feeling the horrible jolt of hitting someone, something impossible happened. She said the figure was suddenly right in front of her hood. Then, in the same instant, it was inside the car, right next to her. Close enough that she felt like it was occupying the same space as her, without touching her at all. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. Her hands were locked on the steering wheel, her eyes wide, her breath caught somewhere deep in her chest. The world narrowed down to that moment, stretched thin and unreal, and then it was gone. Not gone in the way someone runs away or disappears into the dark, but gone by moving through. She said it felt like the presence passed through her car completely, front to back, as if the car hadn't been solid at all, as if it were made of air. In the next second, she caught a glimpse of something behind her, still standing in the road where it had first appeared. She didn't look closely. She didn't check her mirrors properly. She didn't slow down. She pressed the gas pedal as hard as she could. She told me she pushed that old Cutlass Sierra to its limits, the engine roaring louder than she had ever heard it before. The road blurred. Trees became streaks of shadow. Her only thought was to get away, to put as much distance between herself and that place as possible. She didn't stop. She didn't pull over. She didn't look back.